When researching my family's ancestry, I hit a dead end. I know my mom is Irish and German, and my father Native American and Italian from word of mouth. My name is a combination of both Shannon, meaning Irish girl, and Shawnee, the native tribe derivative of northeastern United States, but I wanted to know more. When I decided to do Ancestry a few years ago, I found something interesting. It only showed partial DNA results, and it was my mother's side. There it was, the Irish, the German, Northeastern European. But where was my father's side? It wasn't until then I made some shocking discoveries. I dug deeper and discovered that according to the United States Census Bureau, the North American Native population decreased from 5 million in the year 1500 to less than 500,000 by the year 1900. In his book, Russell Thornton describes how centuries of forced disease, warfare, genocide, removal and relocation, and destruction of autochthonous ways of life all played a part in the Native Holocaust. Within the described Holocaust, unspoken crimes occurred between 1819 to 1978 against the indigenous peoples of the United States. As stated by Washington Post, residential schools were a key tool in America's long history of Native genocide. On March 3, 1819, the Indian Civilization Act was passed, and later followed by the Peace Policy of 1869. These acts began the government-funded genocide of Native American culture within the U.S. Also called boarding schools, Indian schools, and sometimes asylums, residential schools first started to appear toward the beginning of the 19th century. So what are residential schools? Residential schools kept Native children who were forcibly abducted by government agents from their homes and families. They were sent hundreds of miles from home to live at these schools. At these schools, children faced horrors that would be swept under the rug for years to come. Native American children were beaten, starved, sexually abused, neglected, and forced to dispose of sacred cultural aspects, including their clothes, behaviors, music, spirituality, and hair. Numerous denominations within the Christian church adopted the Indian boarding school policy in hopes of eliminating Native Americans and their culture. According to the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, or NABS for short, between 1869 and the 1960s, hundreds of thousands of Native American children were abducted by the U.S. government and sent to residential schools. Many never returned home, and their remains were never recovered. In total, the officials have discovered and acknowledged over 523 government-funded, religious-based Indian boarding schools across the United States through the 19th and 20th centuries. 6 of these existed in Western New York between Jamestown and Lewiston. In 2021, Deb Haaland, United States Internal Secretary, announced the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative. Through this initiative, the federal government's role in operating and overseeing residential schools was investigated and documented. From these investigations, 3 of the 6 mentioned residential schools in Western New York were acknowledged and documented. The 3 newest schools recognized in Western New York include the Thomas Indian School, also called the Gowanda School, also known as the Thomas Asylum Orphan and Destitute Children, operated in Irving, New York from 1855 through the 1960s. The Tonawanda Mission School in Tonawanda. It operated from 1827 to 1845. And the Seneca Mission School, also known as Buffalo Creek Mission, operated in Buffalo, New York from approximately 1818 to 1845. Per the acknowledgement of all three residential schools, former Seneca Nation President shared, the disintegration of native languages, customs, communities, along with the strain caused to family structures, have spanned generations to this day. The promise of futures prematurely brought to an end will forever be untold. This report is a start, not an end. In regards to further local relevance, a book called The Thomas Indian School and the Irredeemable Children of New York was written by Keith R. Burrich to bring awareness and firsthand accounts from residential school survivors from the Thomas Indian School in Irving, New York. This part of history is one that still affects Indigenous people, culture, economics, history, health, and overall well-being, both locally and globally. I now ask for a call to action from all of you. While your ancestry or culture may not have been affected like mine was, I urge you to learn more, be aware, and act with open-mindedness toward other groups of people. Specifically, our reservations are not just casinos, not just cheap gas, and not just weed dispensaries. There's people of strength, love, resilience, tradition, and humanity trying to thrive within systematic adversity. So what can you do? The National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, or NABS, has educational resources so you can learn more about Native boarding schools, curriculum resources available for teachers and parents, research for current impacts, and a U.S. map with all 523 locations of Indian boarding schools. There's a recommended reading list of residential school survivors. You can join the Healing Coalition. It's made up of natives and non-natives, so feel free to join. You can make a donation. The effective altruism can aid coalition in helping residential school survivors and their communities recover. More specific actions can be found for teachers, survivors, descendants, and allies. If you go to www.boardingschoolhealing.org/education/resources, learn more and help today.